So I'm now going to invite to the stage Tony Barnhart and John Grant to talk with us about, come on up, gentlemen, to talk with us about a very important topic and a very timely topic. Again, college football and life, key leadership lessons for sons and parents. Most of you probably know Tony. You've listened to him on the radio, you've heard him on TV, you've read his books, his focus on college football and really the history of college football. And John Grant, our own Rotarian with ESPN, who's also done a wonderful job as the executive director of the Celebration Bowl and really making Atlanta proud in that regard. So gentlemen, have a seat, and we're going to start with a few questions. We also have a mic in the back, so when we get to Q&A, think about the questions you might have for these folks, because this is probably one of the most dynamic areas right now when it comes to any kind of a sporting event. So let's start out, and I'm going to ask this question first of you, Tony. So what is going on in college football? Recently, we have the NCAA and the Power 5 conference in a lawsuit. It's called House versus NCAA, for anybody who wants to look it up. They agreed. Now, I will say they agreed. It still has to be approved by the judge, but the settlement says $2.8 billion in damages to former college athletes. The amount's estimated to provide $20 million plus annually per school for future revenue sharing with athletes. Scholarship caps are going to be removed. And then most recently, college athletes will be allowed to transfer without losing a year of eligibility. Tony, what's happening?
So what in the wide world of sports is going on here? It's a lot, John. It's a whole lot. And I've been doing this a long time. This is my 46th year. And covering college athletics, and there's never been anything like this. But what I'm telling my friends is, look, the $2.8 billion in damages, that's over a 10-year period, okay? That's to compensate the guys who never got a chance to do any kind of NIL because of the rulings by the court. The $20 million, however, comes every single year. And I can promise you this, that $20 million that's going to be shared with the athlete, that total is going to grow, and it's going to grow in a hurry. But it's the scholarship caps, that's up or down. There's some debate on that right now, whether or not. I still think football is going to stay at 85, but there will be discussions about some of the other sports. But, and obviously you always know about the transfer portal. John, it's a mess.
Well, may you live in interesting times.
That's right.
The ancient Chinese proverb. It is different. If you're looking at it through today's lens, you're right, Tony. It is a mess. But we saw this coming. Yep. You and I talked about this. Mm-hmm. This is not new. It's been coming for quite some time. And I use two words to describe it. They're probably not very kind. But, greed and ignorance. Put those two together, and this is what you get.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to see what happens, though.
Well, as an athletic director told me, we just got back from Destin and the SEC meetings. Those were lively. Absolutely was. And an athletic director tell me privately, there's a lot of very tough decisions that have been kicked down the road. And we knew this day would come. We knew when we would have to make a decision we didn't want to make. And now that time is now. So ultimately, it's going to be interesting to see what decisions they actually make when it comes to scholarship limitations, money's involved. I don't know about you, that $20 million per school, most of these schools don't have $20 million laying around, I can promise you. A lot of them are barely operating in the red because of the cost. And we've got one more year, I think, like it is right now. We're going to have this. Nothing's going to get changed this year. I talked to a member of Congress. He says, look, this is an election year. Nothing's going to get done in this town until after the presidential election. So early next year, when we have 1 year of the 12-team playoff behind us, that's when it kicks into gear and decisions are going to have to be made.
Okay, so let's think about leadership lessons. It's our theme this year, leadership lessons for service and growth. Talk to us a few moments about leadership lessons and coaches and players and some lessons that you've seen in the course of your experiences with coaches and athletics.
See, let's talk first about the role of coaches and what a coach's primary responsibility is or what it should be. In an era of the amount of money we're talking about now, the primary responsibility is to win. And if you don't win, you know what happens. You get fired, and then you get a big check for not doing your job. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't we all like to be a college football coach? Give me a couple of years, big contract, and let you buy me out. So there is money out there to be paid. But coaching is really about development.
Right.
It should purely and solely be about development, because at the end of the day, as a parent, when you entrust your child, male or female, into the hands of a coach, your goal, your hope is that they do what coaches do. Not only teach them about the sport, but develop them
right.
into outstanding young people, to give them the foundation for that. And I believe, without question, that the huge majority of coaches have that in mind. But the pressure of winning mm-hmm. adds a dynamic, especially at the collegiate level. Actually, let me back up, because you can go all the way down to Pop Warner leagues now almost. Because coaches at that level sometimes feel like that they have the same pressure as a college or an NFL coach. But developing young people is first and foremost their responsibility, and that's where the joy in it should come from.
The two coaches that have made the biggest impression on me over the years, and John is absolutely right, it's about developing young people. You want to develop them as athletes, of course, that's one of your jobs, but are you going to develop them as human beings? Do they leave your time, they're better players, they're better men, and all that? And the two coaches that have had the most profound impact on me in that area, John Wooden, the great UCLA basketball coach, and Vince Dooley. These were Renaissance men. And I just think about one thing John Wooden said, one of his great quotes is, discipline yourself so others won't have to. That has always stuck with me. And Vince Dooley, again, was a true Renaissance man who cared about a lot more than football.
Does it worry you, gentlemen, that given the changes in college sports, we see a number of coaches basically retiring or moving on? I mean, are we losing some of these folks that have had many of the attributes you just talked about that were positive attributes? Does that concern us? Should it concern us?
It should concern us, John, don't you think?
Because change is inevitable. If we speak, in terms of one of the great ones who just announced his retirement, this year down at the University of Alabama, he's had a storied career. It's going to come anyway, whether it was this year with this or the next year. Time assures change. I'm not afraid of that. It really makes way for the younger coaches. You see Lane Kiffin and others here on this chart. So it allows for the opportunity, and so I'm not really concerned about that, because with younger coaches come new ideas, and that's whether you're at the coaching level, leading institutions. It doesn't really matter. We know that is really sort of a foregone conclusion, and preparation for that is what matters.
Right, and really, if you look at it just honestly about what all's involved, how much money's involved, you can get one big contract now, and you're set for life. Mm-hmm. The coaches of the past, they couldn't walk away. They weren't making enough money. And so I think it has changed the landscape. What's going to be interesting to me is, do the salaries stay where they are now, or do they get reduced? That will be an argument. I still think the coaches will be making considerable amounts of money because there aren't that many truly great coaches.
So let's hit the rewind button a second, Tony and John. Now let's think about the purity of college athletes and college sports years ago. This balance of academics and sports. What's happened to it? Is it still possible? Tony, what do you think?
It's absolutely possible. I've seen it done. Last week I met a young athlete from Germany who was a tennis player at Ole Miss. He wasn't good enough to turn pro coming out of high school, but he came to Ole Miss, got his undergraduate degree, was a great player, and now he's going to go play pro in the European League, come back to Ole Miss and get his doctorate. I mean, that's an opportunity, but he applied himself and took advantage of the opportunity. There's great opportunity There was, I think, John, I told you about this. I asked a coach one time, how many of your players graduate? He said, every one of them that wanted to. And that's true, because the academic infrastructure for these athletes now is incredible, because let's face it, you can't afford to have these guys flunk out. So they spend a lot of money in support staff to make sure these guys get. Now, if you choose to not take advantage of that opportunity, okay, but the opportunity's there.
True, but money changes everything. And now with what we're facing now with the transfer portal, NIL, etc., you ask yourself the question, why does a young person go to school in the first place? Now that dynamic where it was about academics, will that still hold true in an era where I'm being compensated, especially depending on what my background is, what my opportunity is to make a difference for my family and others? It's a great question. So I think the challenge for institutions will change in terms of the opportunity for students. I hate using the word challenge, but the opportunity will change to assure that we continue to try to create value in education.
Right.
And to be able to communicate that. And fortunately, that is going to be pushed down, because by the time you come to university, you should already know what that is. And it won't be up to the university to try to teach that to you at that point.
Another complicating factor in that is that it's because of the transfer portal, it's easy to go from one school to another. You don't have to sit out a year. You can move from place to place to place. And every time you make one of these moves, you probably lose something from an academic standpoint in terms of credits. And so that will be a challenge in the area of the transfer portal.
All right, so let me ask you a question. We've got a lot of talented young men and in the audience and their parents, and some of them might be sitting back thinking, okay, I've got a very talented athlete. But what I'm hearing from Tony and John suggests to me that I need to be thinking about more than just being a good parent. I better go hire a lawyer. I better go hire an accountant. Maybe I need a financial planner, maybe a data analyst to figure some of this stuff out. Is that what it's coming down to for the talented athlete, that you need to be thinking about all those things to factor in all these permutations of how your child may be moved on to the pros?
Well, let me start with this, and it's a question President John and you and Tony and I talked about. Why sports matter? Why do they matter? And especially for every parent here that has a son today, and every son that's in the room, why do sports matter in our country and in our society, and why are they critically important? Imagine America without sports. Can you imagine? Sports is the only entity that brings everything together, everyone together, regardless of your beliefs, religious, political, social, it doesn't matter. We all come together and rally around sports. Sports is the foundation for teaching integrity, for teaching competitiveness, for teaching camaraderie, and putting that together. So President John, without that, and to answer your question, I would hope that, again, a parent recognizes why sports matter and make sure that their kids, when they're engaged in it, and for the young people here, when you are engaged in sport, ask yourself, why do I love it?
So
Why is it fun to me? And make sure that as long as you are connected to it, that it remains first and foremost fun to you.
Right.
So Tony and John, talk also in that regard about sports diversity, equality, and inclusion. This is something that goes to your book as well, Tony, and something, John, you've experienced, because this is one of the reasons sports matters, right?
Mm-hmm. No, it absolutely does. My book takes place in the fall of 1970, when the schools in Greene County High School, Greensboro, Georgia, the black school and the white school were merged, and all of us learned. I met my first black friend on this football team. And today, 52 years after we played our last game together, he is one of my very, very best friends. Those are the kind of things that sports bring you. It brings you equality and inclusion and diversity and all those things, but it is a wonderful, wonderful experience. One thing I would add for the parents, if you think you have, and speak to somebody you trust, if you think you have an athlete who has the potential to be a college athlete, just make sure when the NIL guys show up, make sure you got your ducks in a row. The thing that I'm concerned about most is the exploitation of these young people and parents with stars and dollar signs in their eyes. You need to find somebody you can trust, and you need to trust but verify, okay? You had a situation at the University of Florida where a young man was promised an NIL deal of $13 million. Came time to pay up the money. Turns out that guy didn't have $13 million. And it was an absolute mess. So parents, a lot of lessons for parents, but be careful. Be careful.
So let's think about sports and safety a moment. John, you've been involved in a number of activities here. There's a lot of safety issues that have come into play. We're seeing here a photo of this new helmet that's, I don't know whether it's actually being worn outside of practice, but what are your thoughts about that? We heard earlier about the importance of safety when it comes to preventing diving accidents, but what about safety on this football field?
Well, you're seeing it evolve. You're right, President John. You know, these helmets you see a picture of here are now being worn in practice. They haven't made it to the level of the game yet, but the NFL now is using those in practice as well relative to concussion protocol. You know, we are partnered with an organization called Future MVP. It's one of the only of its kind, and they focus strictly on athlete safety. It's an education program that deals with nutrition, really how to care for your body. So both the student athlete and the parents, what they call the mothers of the athletes, are involved in the training that's involved with that. And we are doing that because, look, it's important for us because the future of the sport, especially if you're looking at football, the future of the sport is predicated upon bringing people into the game and playing players into the game. And we all know that you know, that's a challenge right now. It's a big challenge, and it's not only just in football. Some of it's happening in soccer and other sports where young people are incurring injuries, or where I will say sometimes coaches overcoach with student athletes in conditions where they maybe shouldn't be practicing, heat and otherwise. But sports safety has to be paramount, and it is paramount. As you're seeing at the professional levels, it's rising safety protocols at the collegiate level. I really would love to see it move down more into the high schools and younger, where, you know, it's really important to learn that early.
Right. Well, the schools are very much aware of this. I had one former commissioner say the rules changes that have been made over the last 10 years have been mostly about safety. If you want to get a rule passed, you can get it passed because of safety. Downfield blocking below the waist doesn't exist anymore. And they did this to protect the players. I asked a former conference commissioner about this, how important is this issue? He said, this issue is important because someday I'm going to be sitting in a court of law and grilled, and I'm going to be asked, did I make the game as safe as I possibly could? He said the answer had better be yes. Or a big judgment's going to be coming the way. So this is something that the schools are very, very aware of. Plus, tackling. You think tackling? No, there's a right way and a wrong way to tackle, and you are more subject to injuries when you don't tackle properly.
All right, so let's think about the business of sports. And Tony and John, not everyone in this room, not every son in this room may necessarily be having a future of being a pro athlete, but a lot of folks think about the business of sports. And whether it's football, basketball, esports, you name it, there are great opportunities there. John, you have focused in that area, run a leading bull. Talk to us a little bit about that, and maybe think about talking to the sons, and if they're interested in the business of sports, how might they enter it? And then, Tony, we're going to shift over to you to talk about those sons in the audience that may want to be journalists, to be the next Mr. College Football. So, John, take it away.
Sports is big business. And it's like being an anchor, or you see the person in front of the camera, but you don't really see all the people behind the camera, the opportunities, and that person in front of the camera is reading a script that was written by someone, that's produced by someone, that's edited by someone. Camera operators, not only are they there, but they're making a lot of money. A lot of money. In our business, there are 43 bowl games. So there are 43 people like me who lead bowl games. But we all have huge staffs, and there are a lot of people involved in the sport. So if you love sports, you don't always really want to just look on the field. Right. You really want to look off the field, because that's where a lot of the opportunities are. And the business of sports is, think about what I'm going to give you some numbers real quick. We're going to talk about the NFL for a second. ESPN is paying $1.8 billion per year to the NFL for Monday Night Football and some of the content around that. Now, we're paying $1.8 billion. CBS is paying roughly about $1.8 billion. Fox is paying about $1.8 billion. NBC is paying roughly around the same. If you average it all out for a single year, how much money goes into, I'm just using NFL alone. For college football, the Big Ten is going to get roughly $3 billion per year for their rights fees. The SEC is going to get over $700 million. The ACC is somewhere around $450 million, along with the Big 12. That money pays a lot of people who are connected, whether you're an athletic director, athletic staff. So if you love the game and you love sports, athletics, regardless of what it is, there are a lot of, and the longevity and where you really want to be is on the business side of it. If you love the game, because even if you play it, at some point you won't play forever. And your destination is how to be involved with it and to participate with it on the business side. A lot of money in sports right now. Mm-hmm.
So as Tony talks a little bit about sports journalism, begin to think about your questions. The mic is immediately to the left here. And feel free to come up and ask these gentlemen some tough questions about college sports. But how does somebody enter sports journalism? Tony, how did you do it?
Well, I had no desire at all to be in sports journalism when I graduated from high school. I was going to be a football coach. That's what I wanted to do. But then when I got to college, I had an opportunity to write a story for the student newspaper. And I saw my byline, and I said, hey, dude, that's it. That's it. I was hooked. The only issue is, and I would tell young people this, is be willing to start small. Like the guy, you're not an overnight success. Like I said, this is my 46th year of doing it, but be willing to start small, be willing to do any kind of work that gets you in the door. I tell young people, nobody in the world has enough people to cover high school football on Friday night. Go volunteer, work for free, save your bylines, do all those things. But it's as Coach Saban said, it's a process.
So let's open up some questions. I think, John, you've got a question here, and we've got some other questions that we've come up with. John, go ahead.
Thanks for being here, guys. Fascinating topic, obviously, with these new rules. A couple issues come to mind I'd like you to comment on. One is, what's going to be the future of walk-ons? I'm a little concerned about that.
You should be.
And the second issue is, are we really seeing something like the minor leagues or like baseball, or maybe kids going straight from high school to the NFL like basketball? I mean, what's the future?
Let's talk about walk-ons first. Of all the issues that we discussed in Destin with the coaches, when this whole idea of eliminating or reducing the number of walk-ons, they lost their minds when that came up. They don't like that at all. Everybody has 85 guys on scholarship. That's how many you can have. But most teams, particularly at the SEC level, carry another 30 to 35 players as walk-ons. What they're talking about is those guys they're not on scholarship, but they cost money. You got to feed them, all this kind of stuff, and get equipment for them. And there's going to be a discussion about reducing the number of walk-ons. Coaches don't like it at all, but that's what that's about.
And your other question was about, are we seeing the formation of like minor leagues? And the answer to that is yes. Yes. And the challenge is going to come, if you're a high school student, where are you going to go? Because at the major level, the major college level, the FBS, the four or five conferences we're talking about, where you're going to have a win now category, you don't have the opportunity, the time, or the luxury to develop. So development will come in the smaller conferences. That's where the recruiting is going to take place, and those conferences are going to ultimately be the feeders for the larger conferences, in my view. And we were talking about that earlier. Especially if you're paying players at after that $20 million, then paying a freshman that you may have the opportunity to develop, and now with the transfer portal, players want two things. They want to play and they want to be seen. And if I'm not playing, guess what? I'm going to hit the portal and go somewhere where I think I can play because I want to be seen. But not only that, now I can get compensated for it.
And parents, be aware of this. All of this, the transfer portal and all this, is going to reduce the number of high school players that these big schools sign. Mm-hmm. Why? Why should I go out and recruit an 18-year-old guy to play tight end for me when there are 4 sitting in the transfer portal who've got at least 1 year of experience? It's just going to. Coaches have already told me they are now recruiting. They're not signing 25 high school players anymore. They're going to sign 18 high school players or 15 high school players, and the rest of them will come from the portal because these guys have already played.
So we see the haves and the have-nots, and we've seen it before these changes. But are these changes in college athletics going to just create an even greater schism between those who are going to be out there as the leading teams and others that might just say, look, we just can't play. We can't put that $20 million on the balance sheet every year payout. Do you think it's going to just really, frankly, reduce some of the fun and competitiveness of some of us that may have teams that don't have particularly high-level football teams right now?
Yes. Mm-hmm. We're talking, most of this conversation has been about the top 5 conferences. There are 27 other conferences that's not even in this discussion about the money. Right. 27 other, which is where the majority of the student athletes are across all sports. And they're not in the conversation. So to answer your question, President John, the answer is going to be a resounding yes. Sports, as we've known it at the collegiate level, is being redefined right before our eyes. So the question is not to lament it.
Right.
And Tony and I talked about this sitting at the table. You got to look at, and people are going to have to make some real decisions. They're going to have to make them pretty quickly because, the landscape is definitely going to change. And as parents who have kids that you have aspiring to go to that level, you're going to have to really look at how the tea leaves are shaping up. We're going to definitely have a major divide between the Power 4 now, or Power 5, Power 4 plus 1, I call it Pac-12.
Pac-2.
Pac-2, and everyone else.
Another question.
So is a players' union coming down the road?
They've tried that, and a lot of it. Well, I think in the short term, in the long term, yes, because if you're going to have collective bargaining, somebody's got to do the collective bargaining. And I don't think we get any of this stuff done because collective bargaining makes you exempt from antitrust law. So I think somebody's going to have to negotiate on behalf of that $20 million, like I said, is going to grow. So I think there will be a players' union somewhere down the road.
Katie?
And a follow-up to that, can you speak to what all these changes might mean for women's sports, and will these be a net positive for them?
In my opinion, I'm going to say yes. Mm-hmm. I do believe that. Right now, from a media point of view, the hottest property out there is women's sports. ESPN, we just did a major deal with WNBA. We just did a major deal with the NCAA that included women's sports. In ESPN's owned and operated properties, most people may not know this, but ESPN owns and operates 38 properties, that content for the network. We just added, we got women's softball that's been 2 years. We got the top softball programs down in Florida. Just announced who those are going to be for 2025. We just launched women's gymnastics last year. This year, and I'm telling this room, it hasn't been formally announced, but we're also getting ready to announce women's volleyball. So to answer your question, I believe without question there's going to be benefit. And we're seeing it from where the networks are spending their money for rights.
And I had somebody tell me, of course, they'll cut back on the women's sports. Nope.
No.
Nope. It's called Title IX, and it's not going anywhere. So they're going to have to find cuts somewhere else.
Good point. Good question, Katie. Thank you. Frank?
Do the conferences or the schools have anything in place to protect the young players 18 to 22 years old coming into millions of dollars, not understanding maybe not financial literacy classes, or are there holdbacks for the money to reserve for taxes? Is anyone from the schools or the conferences protecting the players, or do they have anything in place so they don't come and declare bankruptcy or have serious issues like we've seen even with pro athletes?
Well, the short answer is yes, they do have. You could not leave your student athlete to do his own finances, particularly from a tax standpoint. That's the greatest concern, and that will be part of these departments in college athletics that are going to handle this are growing bigger and bigger and bigger. You've got to do it to make sure, because what will happen is you'll get in a recruiting situation and said, you want to come to our school because this school over here that you're thinking about going to, they let a guy wither on the vine and got in a big trouble. You come to our school, we will take care of you. So there's a financial incentive to have that. So,
and to add to that, the NCAA has already passed legislation that requires institutions now to teach financial education to its student athletes.
Okay, so you talked a little while ago about some, I guess we have another question. We talked, Mark, you got a question?
Yeah, but you're not going to like it.
Is it about lawyers, Mark?
The question is about another trend, which is the role of gender in sports. So there's female sports and male sports, but now there's trans and there's other elements in sports. Where does that go? Where do you think it's going to end up?
I have no idea. That was not part of my formal education. I do know it's an issue, but I have no idea what the solution is.
We do know that it's something that's being taken up, but again, that's going to be a part of what the NCAA and its member institutions will deal with. So, as Tony, I don't have a clue with that one yet.
Julius, you got a question? I'm going to ask you to just yell it out there, please. And repeat the question, John, if you could, please.
He asked, the question was, what about Division II and Division III schools along with HBCUs? They're all going to have to redefine how they engage, in my opinion. Again, you heard us talk earlier about schools becoming lower or smaller institutions becoming farm systems for the larger institutions. I just left the Mideastern Athletic Conference spring meeting this past week down in Orlando, and my communication to those athletic directors is, look, it's time now where you have a great opportunity to redefine yourself. If you recall, the smaller, the Division IIs, Division IIIs, and the FCS level was always tough to get the 4- and 5-star athletes. Well, those are going to be available now. More of them will be available coming out of high school. And the opportunity to redefine how you recruit and train and develop from a preparatory perspective, you'll retain some, but the reality is the better athlete that produces on the field is going to ultimately end the portal, because someone's going to recruit them, and they're going to recruit them away from you with the financial incentive. So be prepared to be the best that you can be at the role that you're going to have. And it actually went over pretty well. I was surprised.
We've got time for maybe 2 more questions, and then also please take a look at these leadership lessons from our past. Great. Yeah, this question piggybacks on an earlier one. What sort of safeguards are in place to protect these players against, say, nefarious managers who may be trying to recruit them from one school to another, or one contract for sports apparel to another, something like that? So the question relates to what safeguards are in place to protect the athlete who might be convinced by a nefarious, a wicked person to try to move from one school to another, or one apparel manufacturer to another, or otherwise, give them bad advice. Any thoughts?
Well, that's why it's good to have the money. The NIL money is eventually going to all come in-house, or most of it is going to all come in-house, and the schools will know. We'll sit down with the athlete and said, okay, let's go over your deals. Who are you dealing with here? Do you have legal representation there? So the schools are going to look out for them by the deal and do a periodic review of what kind of deals they've got going. And again, since the school is going to be distributing the lion's share of the money, they have control there.
So to answer your question, like today, none. It's the wild, wild west.
Right.
And
That's right.
this is what Tony referred to as a student, the young man out of Miami, who was promising the money that never materialized. So that's the big challenge and why it's important. There's the idea of having, that move under the control of the institution so that it can provide some safeguards, because right now there are none.
Dennis.
How plausible is it that down the road the academic requirements will just be abandoned? The university become a business brand, effectively hiring the athletes to represent the university for prestige and glory, but they don't have to go to school.
So the question is, how likely is it that all of a sudden universities may actually just abandon the academics piece completely, and it's really just about having the best sports program, and it's highlighted as the best sports program, but really not related to the academics?
If that happens, God help us.
Yeah.
Because, university systems as we know it today will no longer exist for the purposes for which they were founded, and that is educate young people and educate people who, I call it creating human capital assets for our country. So, Dennis, that is a wonderful question. I don't ever believe it would go that far, because none of us would have wanted to go that far, and you got an entire enterprise,
Right.
national enterprise at stake.
Well, and I've spoke to enough college presidents. They understand the educational component has to be there to give legitimacy to what you're doing. And the presidents are not going to be a part of it. Now, where they are making concessions about paying players directly, I never thought that would happen. But it is going to happen because out of financial necessity. But I still think the academic component is going to always be there.
And Wes, the final question, please.
So I teach Army ROTC in high school, at Central Florida High School. So how far does the NIL get pushed down? Do you see that going into high school?
It's already there.
The question is how
Yeah.
far NIL gets pushed down. Does it get pushed down into high school?
It's already there.
Yeah, it's already there. You just don't know about it.
Yes.
Yeah, they're going to, particularly at the high school level, they're going to keep that under wrap. That's why it's just so important for the parents and the coaches and the principals and all that to be looking out for these situations.
Excuse me, Tony, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it is going it'll go all the way down to the level where people are offering you something. I could see a high school football player, hey, Johnny, come to my used car lot on Saturday, pose for pictures. This guy's a high school star, pose for pictures for 2 hours. I'll give you $200. That will absolutely happen in high school, no question.
So, President John, can I ask one question of the young people?
Please.
How, if you're playing sports today, the young men, will you raise your hand? How many sons play sports today?
Let the record reflect that's probably 20 plus.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Well, you've given some great advice to those folks, and we appreciate it. Also, Tony, you might want to finish off with your last quote here, because I think it's appropriate for the best coaches and what you see there.
Well, I was asked to provide some leadership lessons, and one of the things I have found dealing with coaches for all these years, they all have one thing in common. They can get a group of people to believe in something bigger than themselves, and that is hard to do with a young person, but the great coaches know how to do it.
So Tony, John, thank you very much. Let's give them a hand, please.